Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're venturing into something we all use constantly, but maybe don't think about too much: how our ears actually work.
Right, it's this incredibly complex system hidden inside these, well, fairly simple-looking things on the side of our head.
Exactly. And to help us understand it, we're looking at some insights from Chapter 2, How Ears Hear a Dragon's Keen Sense.pdf.
A title that certainly grabs your attention.
It does. So our mission today is really to unpack the amazing biology behind hearing, from the sound wave hitting the ear all the way to our brain figuring out what it is.
It's like a shortcut to appreciating just how much goes into every single sound you hear.
Yeah, it makes you think about that quote from the source, Zoran calling our ears seemingly simple flaps of cartilage, but hinting they're gateways to something much bigger.
It's a good way to put it.
Okay, so let's dive in, starting with the outer ear, the bit we actually see.
Okay, so the outer ear. The most obvious part is the pinna. That's the cartilage and skin structure.
The unique shape everyone has.
Exactly. And those folds, the helix, antihelix, concha, tragus, they aren't just random. They act like a funnel.
A funnel for sound waves.
Precisely. They gather the sound waves and direct them into the ear canal. Zoran called it a cosmic horn in the text.
Ha, I like that, a cosmic horn. And doesn't the shape also help us figure out where sounds are coming from, like up or down?
Yes, particularly in that vertical plane. It gives us cues for elevation. Then the sound travels down the ear canal.
And that's not just a simple tube, is it?
No, not at all. It actually amplifies certain frequencies, specifically those between about 2 and 5 kilohertz.
Which is important because...
Well, that range is crucial for understanding human speech, so our ears are kind of pre-tuned to pick up voices better.
Ha! Clever design.
And the ear canal also produces earwax, or cerumen.
Ah, yes, earwax. Not the most glamorous topic, but apparently quite important.
Extremely important. It's a protective mechanism. It traps dust, little bits of debris, even insects.
Insects. Ugh, okay, good. It traps them.
Definitely. And it also has antibacterial and antifungal properties, so it keeps the canal clean and protected.
Right, so a built-in cleaning and defense system. Okay, so the sound wave, funneled and slightly boosted, reaches the eardrum. What happens next?
The eardrum, or the tympanic membrane. It's this thin, taut sheet of tissue.
Like a tiny drum skin.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
And it vibrates when the sound waves hit it. It's incredibly sensitive to tiny pressure changes.
And those vibrations get passed on.
They get passed to the middle ear. This is a small air-filled space behind the eardrum, and inside it are the 3 smallest bones in your body.
The famous ossicles: hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Or malleus in Killica States, if we're being technical.
Right. Malleus and Killica stapes. They form a chain connecting the eardrum to the inner ear.
And their job is amplification.
Yes, primarily. They act like a system of levers. They take the vibration from the larger surface of the eardrum and concentrate that force onto a much smaller area called the oval window. This significantly increases the pressure.
Which is really important because the inner ear is filled with fluid, not air, right?
Exactly. Moving fluid takes much more force than moving air. There's a difference in impedance, basically, resistance to movement.
Ah, impedance matching. I remember reading about that.
That's what the ossicles do. They overcome that impedance mismatch, making sure the sound energy gets transferred efficiently from the air in the middle ear to the fluid in the inner ear.
So act as an
Ingenious, really.
impedance.
Those tiny bones do a huge job.
They really do. Now, also in the middle ear, there's the eustachian tube.
Right, the thing that makes your ears pop on a plane or going up a mountain.
That's the one. It connects the middle ear to the back of your throat, the nasopharynx.
Why do we need that connection?
It's all about pressure equalization. You need the air pressure on both sides of the eardrum, in the ear canal and in the middle ear, to be roughly equal for the eardrum to vibrate properly.
So when the outside pressure changes quickly, like ascending, like in the source example, or maybe a dragon's rapid ascent.
Yeah, right. Or just going up in an elevator sometimes. That tube needs to open to let the pressure balance out.
And that's why swallowing or yawning helps. It opens the tube.
Exactly. Swallowing, yawning, sometimes even sneezing can pull the muscles that open the eustachian tube, letting air in or out of the middle ear.
Makes sense. Prevents your eardrum from bulging uncomfortably or worse.
Definitely. Okay, so moving from the middle ear through that oval window activated by the stapes, we enter the inner ear.
This is where the really complex stuff happens, isn't it? The conversion into electrical signal.
This is it. The inner ear contains 2 main parts: the cochlea, which is for hearing, and the vestibular system for balance.
We're focusing on the cochlea today, the snail shell-looking thing.
That's right. It's a coiled, fluid-filled structure. Inside it, running along its length, is the organ of Corti.
The organ of Corti sounds important.
It is. This is where the magic happens, the transduction. It sits on the basilar membrane and contains thousands of tiny sensory cells called hair cells.
Hair cells, okay.
And the cochlea is filled with special fluids, paralymph and endolymph. They have different chemical makeups, which is crucial for generating the electrical signals.
Right, you mentioned a biological battery earlier.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
That electrochemical gradient is key. So the stapes pushes on the oval window.
Creating pressure waves in the cochlear fluid.
Exactly. These waves travel through the fluid and cause a structure called the basilar membrane to vibrate.
And this basal membrane isn't uniform, is it?
No, that's critical.
Yeah.
It's wider and more flexible at the apex, the far end of the cochlear spiral, and narrower and stiffer at the base, near the oval window.
Why'd the difference?
Resonance. Because of this graded stiffness, different parts of the basilar membrane vibrate maximally in response to different sound frequencies.
Ah. So high frequencies vibrate the base, and low frequencies vibrate the apex.
Precisely. High frequencies make the stiff base vibrate the most. Low frequencies travel further along and make the flexible apex vibrate the most.
That's amazing. So the cochlea basically lays out sounds by frequency along this membrane.
Yes, it performs a frequency analysis. This spatial mapping of frequency is called tonotopy. It's like a frequency map laid out along the basilar membrane.
A biological spectrum analyzer built right in. Incredible. And the hair cells sit on this vibrating membrane.
They do. And each hair cell has these little projections on top called stereocilia. Think of them like tiny bristles.
Okay.
These stereocilia are arranged in neat rows and connected by even tinier links called tip links. When the basilar membrane moves, it causes the stereocilia to bend.
And the bending is the trigger.
Yes. Bending the stereocilia pulls on those tip links, which physically opens tiny ion channels in the hair cell membrane.
And letting charged particles rush in.
Exactly. Positively charged ions, mostly potassium from the endolymph, flow into the cell. This changes the electrical charge inside the cell, creating what's called a receptor potential. That's the electrical signal.
Wow, from air wave to mechanical vibration to fluid wave to membrane vibration to bending hairs to an electrical signal. That's quite a chain reaction.
It really is. And there are actually two types of hair cells, inner and outer.
Oh, what's the difference?
Well, the inner hair cells, arranged in a single row, are the primary sensory receptors. They're the ones that actually send the main auditory signals to the brain via the auditory nerve.
Okay, so they do the main reporting job. What about the outer hair cells? There are more of those, right?
Yes, typically 3 rows of outer hair cells. Their main role is quite astonishing, actually. They act as amplifiers.
Amplifiers. How?
They can physically change their length in response to electrical stimulation, a process called electromotility. They effectively push and pull on the basilar membrane, amplifying the vibrations, especially for softer sounds.
So they're like tiny motors fine-tuning the response.
That's a great way to think about it. They sharpen the tuning of the basilar membrane, helping us distinguish between similar frequencies and hear faint sounds more clearly.
That is remarkable. Active amplification within the ear itself.
It's a key part of our hearing sensitivity. So the inner hair cells generate the signals.
Which then travel along the auditory nerve.
Correct. The auditory nerve, or cochlear nerve, and importantly, this nerve preserves that tonotopic organization we talked about. Fibers from the base carry high-frequency info. Fibers from the apex carry low-frequency info,
So the map is maintained.
all the way up the pathway. The signal goes through various processing stages in the brainstem, then to the thalamus, a sort of relay station in the brain, and finally reaches the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe.
The temporal lobe. And that's where we actually hear, where these signals become sound as we know it.
That's where the complex interpretation happens.
Yeah.
Music, speech, a car horn, a dragon's roar, as the source mentions, it all gets decoded and understood there.
Okay, so let's talk about how we perceive different aspects of sound. Pitch, for instance. Highness or lowness. That relates directly back to tonotopy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Pitch perception is fundamentally based on which part of the basilar membrane is vibrating the most, and therefore which hair cells are sending the strongest signals along the auditory nerve.
So the brain basically knows. Signals from this part of the nerve mean high pitch. Signals from that part mean low pitch.
Precisely. The auditory cortex has neurons that are specifically tuned to respond best to certain frequencies, maintaining that map established in the cochlea. It's location coding.
Fascinating. What about loudness? How do we perceive intensity?
Loudness corresponds to the amplitude of the sound wave. A larger amplitude means a bigger vibration of the eardrum, the ossicles, and the basilar membrane.
which means the hair cells' stereocilia bend more.
Exactly. They bend further, the ion channels stay open longer, more ions flow in, and the hair cells release more neurotransmitters. This causes the connected auditory nerve fibers to fire more frequently, more action potentials per second.
So more firing equals louder sound perceived by the brain.
Right. And also, louder sounds will activate a wider area of the basilar membrane and thus more hair cells overall. The brain interprets both the increased firing rate and the recruitment of more neurons as increased loudness.
And there's something called temporal summation, too.
Yes, the brain can integrate neural activity over short periods, which also contributes to the perception of loudness, especially for sustained sounds.
Okay. And this is where the decibel scale comes in, right? Measuring this intensity. It always seems a bit non-intuitive.
It is non-intuitive because it's logarithmic, not linear. The formula L equal 10 log 10 IA0 reflects this.
It's logarithmic, meaning a small change in dB can mean a huge change in actual sound energy.
Exactly. A 10 dB increase means the sound intensity is actually multiplied by 10. A 20 dB increase means it's multiplied by 100.
Wow, so why use such a scale?
Because the range of sound intensities we can hear is absolutely enormous. From the quietest sound we can just barely detect to sounds that cause pain. The intensity difference is like a trillion-fold or more. A linear scale would be completely impractical.
Right, the numbers would get ridiculously big.
The logarithmic decibel scale compresses this huge range into manageable numbers, roughly corresponding to how we perceive loudness. A 10 dB increase is perceived as roughly doubling the loudness.
So 0 dB is roughly the threshold of hearing, a whisper maybe?
Around that, yeah.
Hmm.
Normal conversation might be 60 dB. A motorcycle may be 95 dB.
Right.
And then you get to things like jet engines or, well, maybe a dragon's roar, as Zoran speculates, up at 140 dBs or more.
And those really high levels are dangerous.
Extremely. Prolonged exposure to sounds above about 85 dBs can start to damage those delicate hair cells, particularly the outer ones first.
And that damage is permanent, leading to hearing loss.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
It's called sensorineural hearing loss. The hair cells don't regenerate in mammals. So, Doran's warning about the dragon's roar.
Yeah.
It's a serious point about noise-induced hearing loss. Protect your hearing.
Absolutely crucial advice. Okay, we've covered the mechanics, pitch, loudness, but hearing isn't just passive reception, is it? The brain does a lot of interpreting. Psychoacoustics.
Right. This is where perception really comes into play. How our brain makes sense of the auditory world. For instance, sound localization.
Figure out where a sound is coming from. How do we do that with just 2 ears?
Our brain is incredibly smart about comparing the signals arriving at both ears. It uses 2 main cues.
Testament to their
The interval
evolution.
time difference, or ITD.
The time difference.
Yeah. A sound coming from your right will reach your right ear slightly before your left ear. The brain detects this tiny time difference, microseconds usually, and uses it to figure out the horizontal direction. This works best for lower frequencies.
Okay. And the second cue?
The interval level difference, or ILD. That same sound from the right will be slightly louder in your right ear than your left ear, because your head creates an acoustic shadow.
Blocking some of the sound.
Exactly. This intensity difference is more pronounced for higher frequencies, which don't bend around obstacles as easily as low frequencies do.
So ITD for lows, ILD for highs, roughly speaking.
That's a good general rule. And remember the pinna, the outer ear. Its shape also helps, especially with telling if a sound is in front, behind, above, or below us. It colors the sound differently depending on the direction.
It's like our head and ears work together as a complex direction-finding system,
Pretty much. Then there's masking.
where one sound makes it hard to hear another.
Yes. A loud sound can essentially drown out a quieter sound, especially if they're close in frequency. Interestingly, low-frequency sounds are generally better at masking high-frequency sounds than the other way around.
Like traffic noise making it hard to hear birdsong.
A perfect example, and related to this, is auditory scene analysis, how we make sense of complex sound environments.
Like the cocktail party effect, being able to focus on one conversation in a noisy room.
Exactly. Our brain is constantly working to group sounds that likely come from the same source and separate them from sounds coming from other sources. It uses cues like pitch, timing, loudness, and location.
It's like sorting through audio chaos to find the stream you want.
It's an amazing feat of neural processing.
This is why it's hard to hear some.
Do it.
Okay, what about timbre? The quality of a sound.
Timbre is what allows us to tell the difference between, say, a violin and a flute, playing the same note at the same loudness. It's often called the tone color or texture.
And what creates that difference?
It's the combination of the fundamental frequency, the main pitch, and all the other higher frequencies, the harmonics and overtones, that are also present in the sound. Different instruments or voices produce different combinations and relative intensities of these overtones.
So the overall recipe of frequencies is different.
Exactly. And our brain interprets that complex spectral shape as timbre.
Fascinating. And finally, our perception isn't just bottom up from the ear, is it? Our expectations matter too.
Absolutely. This is top-down processing. What we expect to hear, the context we're in, our past experiences, all of this influences how we interpret the raw auditory data coming in.
Like hearing a creak in a spooky old house versus hearing the same creak in your familiar kitchen.
Precisely. The interpretation can be very different based on context and expectation. It shows how interconnected hearing is with memory, emotion, and our general understanding of the world.
So putting it all together, what we actually hear is this incredibly complex construction. It starts with physics, goes through intricate biology and mechanics, and ends up being interpreted and shaped by our brain.
That's a great summary. It's a journey from a simple vibration in the air to a rich perceptual experience involving multiple parts of the brain, not just the auditory cortex, but areas linked to emotion, memory, even motor control.
It really makes you appreciate those seemingly simple flaps of cartilage, doesn't it? They're the start of this whole incredible process. It kind of hammers home how much our reality is built by these biological systems.
It does. And understanding how it works, as Zoran implies, gives you a certain power, the power of appreciating the complexity behind something seemingly simple. So maybe a question for you, listening now. Does knowing all this change how you hear the sounds around you, even just a little bit?
It definitely makes me listen differently, more attentively maybe, and it brings up those deeper questions Zoran touches on. If our brain constructs what we hear, what does that mean about sound itself? Does a tree falling in the forest make a sound if nothing is there to hear it, in this biological sense?
The classic philosophical question. It highlights the difference between the physical phenomenon, vibrations, and the perceptual experience, sound. It's definitely food for thought.
Indeed. And maybe one final thought to leave you with. Think about other creatures. Given different environments and needs, how might their ears have evolved differently? What kind of sonic worlds, completely unlike our own, might they experience every day?